Today's guest is Philip Hasheider. I met Philip Hasheider at the IANDS conference, International Association for Near-Death Studies. Philip has an amazing story. He had a heart attack where he died and was dead for 6 minutes before he was resuscitated. During this time, he had an amazing near-death experience where he went to another dimension. He wrote a book about this experience called 6 Minutes in Eternity. And I hope you enjoy my talk with Philip, where he shares what it was like to spend 6 minutes, according to our time, in a completely different dimension. Hey everyone! I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@WTFJustHappened.net and put science and spirituality in the title. Welcome to What the F Just Happened? I'm your host, Liz Enton. If you listened to the intro, you know my story. If not, here's a brief summary. I'm a sciencey-skeptic, and when my dad died, I took a shot in the dark and decided to investigate if there was any possible evidence of an afterlife. I assumed that was as realistic as Santa Claus, but I was desperate. However, I was so blown away by what I discovered that I wrote a book and launched this podcast. In this podcast, I'll be talking to some fairly normal people about some really weird stuff. I speak with everyone from psychic mediums and afterlife researchers to ordinary people who've had some inexplicable experiences. So come, listen. There's no need to draw any final conclusions. Keep an open mind and wonder, what the F just happened? Hi, I am speaking today with Philip Hasheider, and I met him at the IANDS conference, the International Association for Near-Death Studies, and he had some very amazing experience that he wrote beautifully in his book. So I'm very excited to speak with him today. So welcome, Philip.
Well, thank you, Liz. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to speak with you, and also for giving me the opportunity to share my story to a larger audience. I appreciate that very much.
Well, would you just remind everyone, first of all, the title of your book?
Oh, my book is called 6 Minutes in Eternity, which is a brief description of where I was during my death experience a few years ago. And it was something that was not planned or anticipated, but it was a experience that really changed my life. Such an experience is so profound, it couldn't help but do that. I had never read about any other NDEs or life experiences such as that prior to my own happening. And it was out of the unusual circumstances that I experienced that morning, that early October morning, that caused me to really investigate and think about what happened and why it happened, where it happened, at the precise time it did happen. Briefly, I can explain that I live on a Wisconsin farm, and I'm a farmer. I'm a husband, and we have 2 children. And I've done a lot of writing in the course of my career. I've written over 30 books on agriculture, family histories, family stories, and farming in general. So that's my background. And the morning of my collapse, I had been out in our pasture looking at our cattle because I usually check them every morning. And most of the time I can get in amongst them, uh, move around with them, and pet them, scratch them, whatever. And there's never any problem. That morning was really unusual because I got no closer than 300 yards to the group that was out in the middle of the pasture. Cattle are very intuitive. Most farmers will find that livestock tend to have what we as humans would call a sixth sense. I mean, they see stuff before we do, and they can sense stuff is going to happen, even though we try not not to let them know something is going to happen. That morning, I would typically go out to our pasture every morning. And it was easy for me to get amongst the cattle, to pet them, scratch them, talk to them, just move around them without them getting all excited. That morning, however, I went out and couldn't get within 300 yards of them before one of them jumped up and took off lickety-split across the field and stopped about 900 yards away. Well, that caused the rest of the group that were also lying down in the grass to jump up and prick their ears towards my direction, look at me, and then they all took off. And I hadn't said a word. So I didn't think a lot about that at the time. Uh, so I saw what I had seen, that everyone was okay. And that morning, I had planned to go into our local hospital's fitness center for a workout, which is what I did then. And I went downstairs, changed my clothes, came back up, said hi to the staff, warmed up, went to one of the machines, and which was the arm curl machine, and did about 20 arm curls, and stood up from that, which was not a strenuous exercise by any means. Stood up from that, and the thing I remember is both of my forearms were tingling, like you get when you lie on them and they fall asleep on you and you wake up and they tingle. Well, that was both forearms. And that was the last thing I remember for the next 8 hours, at least in this dimension. What happened next was finding myself in a space that was, the best I can describe, is the biggest theater I've ever seen or been in. I mean, it was just a huge arena. And I found myself sitting on a raft. Well, it would be a raft like structure that we would accumulate or acknowledge. And I should mention here that it was easy for me to explain how I got to this dimension, but trying to explain exactly what I experienced, where there are no human words to describe it or explain it. There's no vocabulary in that dimension. It's all through energetic transmission, the information and knowledge. And so what I've done to the best of my ability is try to explain what I'm going to describe in human terms. But I would ask people to realize that it is just more than that. But this was what I could put into words. And the raft itself, where I found myself, was really interesting because it floated. It was floating on what I can only describe as energetic waves coming at me, like we would equate waves in an ocean. But there was no water. These were waves of energy coming at me, and I realized that they were not only coming towards me, they were going through me, and I didn't feel anything. I didn't feel Well, first of all, I didn't realize at that point that I had died, and that people back in the exercise room were frantically trying to get my heart started again, uh, because I felt normal. I felt good. It was really a very loving atmosphere. So I in witnessing these waves coming at me, I started to look around to see what else was there. And I couldn't help but look up and see this, what I can describe as a gigantic golden light, a ball, a sun. If you think of compressing a million suns, it was huge. It filled up the whole arena. But yet, it wasn't a sun where one got burnt up, because I could actually reach out and touch it. And I wasn't confused, because I knew that that was the source of all creation. People may refer to it as God, it may refer to it as divine creator, or whatever term they could use to explain a higher knowledge uh, and information. That's what I saw in front of me. And again, at that point, there was no sense that I had left my body, other than I could look at what I would call my hands. I mean, in this dimension, but they were basically uh, filaments of energy that were transparent to make it look like they were my hands. So I was essentially formed into an energetic hologram of myself from back here. But I didn't realize that I had left here to get to that point. Um, After realizing that I wasn't uh, where I had started out, I did turn around to look to see what else was there. And to best explain it in human terms, is that I could see the edge of eternity, which there was no edge. It just kept going. And it was in all directions that we would consider directions: north, south, east, west, up, down, sideways. Uh, the eternity just went everywhere that we would consider a space. So I'm sitting on this raft and trying to understand what this was all about. And I looked up at the gigantic sun, the ball, and I realized that this was a source of all love, because the whole feeling that I brought back with me later was love. That is what that dimension was. And from that ball, I saw little sparks continually flowing out, which I instinctively knew was other entities being created, other perhaps people, going in all directions of eternity. So when I turned around again, it was then that I noticed the infinite number of universes, uh, dimensions, if you will. And I best explain it by thinking of all of our universe, everything we see uh, or know about in this dimension, and compressing that all down to a single sheet of paper, uh, and then hanging it out in eternity. And then next to that, taking another dimension, compressing that down, and hanging that right next to it, micromillimeter away. And you continued to do this all across the face of it, in what we would term up and down, and sideways, and lengthwise. There were all these infinite, what I would consider infinite eternities, infinite dimensions. And all of them were connected to an energetic thread that ran back to this source of all creation. And that's what I saw. Now, I'm convinced that I experienced more than all that, uh, because I liken it to a computer, where if you have a computer, say, that has 2 gigabytes of memory, and you all of a sudden, in an instant, try to stuff 100 gigabytes, terabytes, whatever you want, into that system, it's probably going to crash it. So, in essence, I think what I was given to bring back was only a minute amount of information that I actually experienced there. Now, I'm not sure at what point I will experience more of that, but this is what I have to tell, and I've explained it probably in better detail in my book. During the time I was there, and I was asked this by someone later as to how long I felt I was in this eternal dimension. And my best answer that I can give was centuries, centuries of our time. And it was only later that when I was able to obtain my medical records and understand what the personnel in the hospital staff's personnel in the fitness center and the EMTs and ambulance people had done, there was only 6 minutes. Well, it was not only 6 minutes, it was 6 minutes, a little bit over, before they could get my heart restarted. And that was after continual CPR, chest compressions, and 2 or 3 electrical shocks. So that 6 minutes is where I experienced that eternal dimension. And that, hence, that's why the name of the book.
Wow. So I have some other questions based on things you said. That ball of light sun. First of all, part one, do you feel it was conscious and hosted? Did it host our consciousness, or did it have a consciousness of its own?
Well, both. Both, because our consciousness is derived from that consciousness. There's no doubt in my mind. Uh, when I mentioned earlier about being able to put my experience into human terminology, one of the difficulties I had in describing it was explaining the transference of information from a source, such as what I saw, or other entities that I encountered, that it was instantaneous and it was not something verbal or linguistic. So people can believe that or they don't have to. It's their choice. But I know what I experienced, and that's what's important to me. I should probably mention that when I was in this raft, I had no idea that my body had died, and was lying on the floor back in this fitness room. There was no pain. To me, there was no trauma that happened. I just left, and I didn't ask why. And it was only later, after I returned, that I was able to learn what happened to me, why I had collapsed. But that was just a small part of what I was trying to learn, because I needed to know why it happened, when it happened, with all the help available at that particular time. That was the motivation afterwards, sometime afterwards, after I left the hospital, to try to understand, because it was a big question of why. Why did I get to experience that? Why did I come back? So that was the lengthy recovery period to try to understand. And I think I have some of the answers as to why I came back. I don't think I have all of them, but as I mentioned, I don't think I also don't remember exactly everything that happened. I think in time, maybe I will, if that's what I need to move forward in my life. But if I don't, I have a pretty good basis of understanding what happened while I was in that dimension.
Right, your senses. You talked about feeling, seeing, touching. To what extent is that different um, in terms of intensity or realisticness compared to when you're in your body and you're seeing and touching and smelling and all your senses?
I can't say that I smelled anything when I was in that other dimension.
Mhm.
I could see, but they were not what we would consider eyes. It was a mosaic with distinct patterns to it. Like I mentioned, with my hands being filaments of energy, that was very real, and it still is. Um, Taste. We're talking physical sensations here that were specifically developed by a human body. But in that dimension, we are looking at, or I was looking at energy that was of that dimension. And so, what the properties of that energy were there, I could hear octaves, and I talk about that in my book, that there was an octave I could hear, and I couldn't make any sense of it. I If I were going to describe it in human terms, it would be like a low cello note that kept going up and down like the waves were coming in. And so there's this co-joining of energy waves in aural sound. Uh, could I touch anything and feel it? Only from a energetically sensor feeling. It's like if you have a friend, a good friend, or a friend, stand across from you, and you put your hands together, you press them together. You don't have to touch them to feel that energy coming from them. You don't have to. Right? And so it's similar to that. Would be the best way that I can describe it. But we have no when I was in that dimension, I had no hunger. I mean, I had no reason to want to taste anything. To hear as we hear was not something that either was a problem or what we would be attuned to hear.
Yeah.
Does that help you?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Oh,
And you're a very good describer. So
thank you. I'm better writing it than I am actually trying to verbally. The really interesting thing to me was that it was so instantaneous. I mean, I was here 1 minute and gone the next. Well, not even a minute, it's like a demarcation line. And I didn't feel I had left anything of loss behind. I was just in a really different dimension that was so loving that I could have stayed. One of the odd things that I had to overcome afterwards was trying to keep myself from wanting to go back. It's not that I contemplated suicide to do it. It's just that when things got a little rough, during my recovery, that, what do I need this for? If I just go back there, everything is really great. It's really welcoming. It's all love. I'm not judged. I'm not, condemned for something I might have done here. It just was so inviting. And some people have asked me if I've thought I was dreaming this. In fact, I spoke to a group of nurses at a local hospital at the invitation of their director to explain what happened to me and what I experienced and what I felt. And one of them asked me outright, "Do you think you could have dreamt this?" And I said, no. I first of all, I couldn't imagine those things here, thinking about it. My imagination isn't that great. Secondly, every time I sit and think about that dimension, I continue to get this welling up of warmth within me. Now, a hallucination, as I understand it, you have a vision of some sort, and that's the end of it. But this to me is an interrelatable experience in where I can physically feel the warmth of where I was. So that says a couple of things to me. One is that we can transmit ourselves from this dimension into another one. It's like going through a veil of very thin energy, and you just pass through it. Or if you think of a little shower of water coming down, all you do is step beyond it. That's the only difference between this existence and that one, because we are part of that eternal dimension, even though we're here in this lower energy dimension. And it's led me to understand that the bodies we have here are more than the sum of its parts. By that, I mean, when I was standing next to the exercise machine, I had all the parts. When I collapsed and was basically dead on the floor while they were trying to revive me, I had all the body parts except for the spirit of me, the soul, if you will, that left and went back to the eternal dimension. So there was something. They were the same bodies except one thing. The spark of life, the spark, whatever you want to call it, had left. And then when they were able to get my heart restarted, it came back. And that's why I'm still here. And so we are able to move between dimensions. We're able to move between time. As I mentioned earlier, that it felt like I was there for centuries. It really did. To me, it did. And that's hard to explain because we are used to beginnings and endings, where that's what the human condition is developed into, because you have to fit into this. I have used an example of when in 1951 I took the off ramp on the energetic superhighway and dropped down into this one, which is a lower energy level than the one I came from. So I was born to my parents and I grew up here. I was taught here, And I've now lived 72 years of this human experience. Now, eventually, and this is what I've learned from everything I've experienced. Eventually, my body, as well as everyone else's, is going to use up its fuel, and we will cease to exist as a human. However, my eternal spark, my soul, if you will get back onto that energetic on ramp and get back into that dimension and go to my next experience. Now, this is what I believe, that beyond this life lies another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one for all eternity. So we're on this energetic experience because once we've been created, we cannot be uncreated. So that's really a hopeful sign that I think that there is no end to us. We just transform into a different aspect of us. Now, will I come back here? I don't know. That's probably something my soul will learn at the appropriate time. But I know that if I leave here, it's not the end of me. It's not the end of my energetic expression, which is what I saw in those filaments while I was sitting on the raft. That's the me. That is the real me, the internal me that is always there. And it's the same for everyone else. And if I can impart anything to anyone listening to this, is that, yeah, we're going to have, a life here, but that doesn't mean the end of us. We will continue to exist, and we may go to one of those multiple dimensions that I saw were suspended in the air, and all going back to the same source.
And so you say we keep coming back in different forms. You think sometimes we're human, sometimes we're in physical dimensions, maybe in all different planets, sometimes we're non-physical beings for periods of time. We go through all different types of consciousness and dimensions and planets and multiverses, universes, galaxies. Is that how you think it works?
In a general way, yes. I think that we exist as that eternal spark. That is the true us. That is the true you. That is the true me. That is the true friend you have that you go out with, or whatever. But to come into this dimension, in order for the true us to experience this lower energetic level, we have to adopt a human body. So we are born of parents because that's the way our species works. I mean, that's the way the rules were set up at the beginning. And once we're born, we grow into that form. Now, do we come back as a dog or something, a tree? That I have no idea. I cannot give you an answer to that. I can only explain what I had witnessed, and other people may have other opinions about it, and that's fine. I'm just explaining what my experience was, and it could be. But I do believe, after what I had seen, that we extend ourselves into many other dimensions. What those are, do they follow the same rules as this one? I haven't the faintest idea, but I'm looking forward to finding out. And I'm not afraid of it because of the love that I felt that I'm not going to be lost. I'm not going to be left behind. I'm going to be remembered by the source of all creation.
And you said there was a why or a reason you think you came back that you're still working on figuring out a bit, or maybe you have figured it out. What is that reason, or what do you think at this point about that?
Well, that's an interesting question because it happened about 8 months after my collapse. Uh, I had been uh, basically uh, in pretty much full recovery because I never had any residual effects from my collapse, even though it took 6 minutes to get my heart restarted. All my vital signs had returned to normal as soon as they got my heart started again. So understanding why that happened occurred one night while I was sound asleep. Now, I don't remember this happening, but Mary, my wife, usually kept a notepad by our bed on her side so that she could write some notes if she thought of something in the night. Well, one morning, she said, "Well, do you remember what you said last night?" And I said, "No." So she explained what happened. She said, "I sat up in bed and I started talking," and she grabbed her pad and started writing it down. And I said, "Okay, what did I say?" And she said, "Well, I don't believe I asked for this." And I said, "Ask for what?" And she said, "That's what I asked you. What ask for what?" And I said that I was sent back to be a conduit of hope to people who didn't have any. And I said, "Okay, what happened then?" She said, "Nothing. You went back to sleep. You laid back down and went back to sleep." And I still have no recollection of that conversation at all, but fortunately, she had written it down to explain to me. Well, that made all the sense in the world then to me, because I knew then why I had come back, which had been one of my original questions. Why did I come back? I mean, what is it I'm supposed to be doing? Is there something I'm supposed to be doing? Uh, so that's it. And then I became aware of the message that I needed to write this down. Not to glorify me, but to explain what I had experienced so that other people who have a little trouble handling what comes after this life will have some hope that this is not the end. I have no other agenda. I mean, I wrote a book, and that's really the extent of what I've done. I've talked to people. I've been fortunate to meet other people who have had similar experiences, but were afraid to talk about it because they were afraid people would think they were crazy. Uh, but they're not. I, in looking back over what I experienced, I I cannot unsee the things I saw in that dimension. I cannot unfeel things I felt there that I brought back with me. And I cannot unexperience all of that. So it does tell me that this is true. And I can also add to that as confirmation that I do believe we all have guides. And my guides told me that it was true. Now, people can believe that there are guides. I mean, there are people who believe in angels and that sort of thing, and that's a very similar, depending on what their background is. That there may be other things they refer to, but I believe they're there. They're entities that do help us. I don't think they tell us what to do, and I don't think they direct our actions, other than providing us with opportunities to make a choice one way or another. I think that happens. So one of the guides I had asked specifically, I mean, am I supposed to write about this? And the answer was yes, yes, yes. So that became the part of the reason that I wrote the book. First was to explain it to myself because I had trouble understanding it. Secondly was to offer it to anyone who was interested to look at my perspective. And it's just my perspective. I'm not a messiah. I'm not a prophet. All I can do is tell you what I experienced, and you can believe it or not, and that's fine. Um, but I would like people anyone who listens to this, I would ask them one thing, to keep your hands open and just allow for what we would call impossibilities to be possible.
And one thing that I thought was very interesting, you touched upon it and touched upon it more in your book. You basically had almost no physical damage in your healing. I mean, there was obviously challenges, but it was nothing compared to what doctors were expecting. In fact, they were a bit baffled by that. And that seems to be a consistency of people who've had near-death experiences. Do you relate to that in any way? Do you think that ties into your near-death experience, that your healing was, the damage was so minimal?
Well, I do. I don't know how else to think about it because having a heart that stops for 6 minutes and reading, part of my recovery was to find out a medical explanation. So I read a lot of materials. I have a 6-inch stack of hospital reports, and the effects of what happened could be major. And in fact, my family, who ended up at the ER, my wife, our son and daughter and her fiance ended up in the ER. And afterwards, they were really concerned because I kept repeating myself. Now, during this time from when I collapsed to when I finally understood that I was not in the fitness room was about 8 hours. Now, I remember all of the things from being in the other dimension, but I don't remember anything of my activities during those 8 hours being once I collapsed. That includes the EMT compressions, the shocks, the ambulance ride, the doctors in the ER. None of that is in my memory, even to this day, because I was surprised to see my wife standing at my feet. And I was lying on one of these, gurneys, and then realizing that our son and daughter were there and couldn't figure out what had happened. So there's a period of time where none of my recollection is there, which is okay. Apparently, there wasn't all that much going on anyway, but all of the doctors told them that they were surprised at my vital signs because typically they would elevate and there would be other physical traumas that they would notice. But even after I was back for a cardiology exam, he said that there was absolutely no damage to my heart. So why is that? And if other people are in the same way, there's a reason for that to happen. I mean, I can't think that there wouldn't be.
Well, yeah, one thing I noticed too, and you touch upon this in your book, that your collapse happened, like a bunch of things lined up unexpectedly. So it was much easier to get you to the hospital. It seemed like a bunch of, yeah, I mean, you could, yeah, just that all these, it was very unlikely that it would have happened the exact way it did with all these layers to make it much easier to save you. Uh, and do you think that was in some higher dimensional plan in some way?
Yeah, I do. I mean, that's a good way to put it because I had asked myself that question many times over the next couple of months after I had gotten out of the hospital. Why did it happen in the fitness room when there were 5 qualified people to be able to start CPR? And I literally fell next to one of the staff people. And I know this because later I interviewed all of the people involved with my recovery or, bringing me back. So, yeah, their testimony as to what they saw and were doing, is what I can explain. the having that group of people available right there, and the ambulance and the EMTs were right across the street, so they had come running over once they got the call, and there were 11 or 12 people in the room then, uh, plus the people who were there exercising, which they shuttled out. But why is it that it happened there when it could have happened an hour earlier when I was out in the pasture with our cattle, where there were no way to get any help? Nobody would have known I was out there until Mary came home later that night and came looking for me. And so, yeah, it, it was a conjunction of many things that happened, and I've likened it to before, and then my collapse, and during that collapse, my before all of a sudden shot through this prism and came out the other side, and I had a different set of eyes and looking at the world in a completely different way, and having a completely different experience than I ever would have had before. So, in an odd way, I can say I'm really glad I had my near death experience. I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but for me, it reset my life, and I'm grateful for that.
And what did you think happened when when people died before your NDE, and what do you think now?
Oh, that's a good question. Honestly, I never gave it much of a thought before. I was involved with farming, and I was involved with writing books, uh, involved with our family. So it wasn't really high on my list. But working with animals, um, I became, from a young age, I became exposed with the life and death situation on a farm. I mean, animals live and animals die. I went to my first funeral as a 5-year-old and distinctly remember it because it was my great grandmother. Uh, but yet, it was always a kind of an intangible thing that, yeah, we die and then we go somewhere. Uh, People have referred to, many people, generations have referred to a heaven, and I didn't experience that when I went. So that was one answer to me. There was no clouds where I was. I mean, you're not stuck in this cloud. You're just part of a larger energetic uh, atmosphere. And so, no, yeah, I can't say that I ever really thought about it to a great extent, other than that, well, when I did think about it, it's like, well, that'll happen someday, probably, and go from there. Now I have a very, very intimate experience with it, but yet it's nothing I'm afraid of. And I don't, I would hope that people would read what I've written and come to your own conclusions, because it's not that scary. I mean, one could ask themselves the question, okay, what does happen afterwards? I mean, we have this, what I referred to as soul. I mean, it just doesn't go lay in the ground with you because I escaped this body. It's not that I escaped. That may not be the correct word. I left this body. I mean, I never asked to, that I recall, uh, but I went. But yet I came back. So having that experience of where I went to come back and came back to explain it, now I have a much better understanding, and it doesn't frighten me. I'm not saying that people can't be afraid of it. That's their choice. But we are conditioned by our society that we're born and then We depart and we're dead. And that's the end of the story. Well, I don't believe that because that's not what I experienced. And if I experienced it, then I'm confident that other people who have left here are experiencing the same thing. Only they have not returned to this dimension yet that I'm aware of.
One thing I wanted to ask, you also just touched upon how coming here is a lower dimensional, like a heavier, lower vibrational energy. Is this the lowest vibrational energy that experience that we can have?
That's a good question. To me, it is. I don't know how you would go lower than this unless, no, I just don't know. I can't imagine anything that would be lower than this. As I mentioned, I believe I mentioned earlier, we come into this body and so we can experience this dimension. If we didn't, our soul or our internal spark, our energy, whatever you want to call it, would still exist, but it would not be able to interact in the same way we do, like me with you, me with my family, you with your family. It wouldn't be able to interact in the same way. So this is just part of the wondrous nature of life. And it's a gift for us to embrace. And the energy of a higher dimension coming down into this one, you have to you have to take on the density, is a good word, density of this life. That's why when you think about it, that's why babies cry when they're born. They have been tethered to a higher dimension in their existence, and all of a sudden they're placed in this one. So it's a shift downward for them, but they still retain the essence of what they were before they were created in a human form. Okay. Before we got off, I was going to talk about a couple of things that I've learned from all this. What do I think of it now, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well,
Yes, please.
The first of it is that we will be propelled into eternity, whether or not we think we will. It will happen. From what my experience was, there is other dimensions, and the next one we go to will be one a little bit higher than this one. If that weren't true, and if I thought that my body here was the end of my existence, then why is it, and I would ask people to think of this, why is it that I could experience all of that in another dimension and bring it back? If at the end of my physical life here, that was it, everything disappeared, why could I still experience that and be able to recall it later? I think each person will have to answer that question for themselves, but I'd like them to think about it. Besides that, our lives, our existence, our energy will continue on and on and on through all eternity, however long you can imagine eternity or infinity to be. That's one of the things I've learned. I've learned that we chose to come here to learn for whatever reasons, and that this existence in this plane, in this dimension, is one of learning. It's not one of punishment. The things we do to ourselves are not really intended, because it's our own physical uh, doing versus something else. So we do come here to learn, and we learn many different lessons. One of mine was why I came back and what do I do now? I mean, just because I had a near-death experience or a death experience, whichever way you want to call it, it doesn't give me a free pass. I still have bills to pay. I still have to work. I still have to abide by rules of the road. I don't get a special dispensation for all that just because I had an extraordinary experience. We come back, or we are here to appreciate and recognize the divinity in another person. And you can use whatever term you want to apply to that. But that's everyone here is of the same DNA of God, of the source of all creation, the divine creator, whichever term you want to put to it. We are all of that same DNA because that's where we all come from. So we are all alike in that sense. Although people want to separate us and try to put us into categories, we are still all the same. And so to recognize that in another person and accept it, I think is one of the lessons that we do need to learn here. I've learned that there is hope, that death is not the end of our existence, maybe our physical bodies, but that is going to happen at some point in the future because our bodies here are not created to last forever, although there are people who are trying to change that. But my question would be to those who support that is, why would you want to live in this body forever? I mean, why not go to another dimension and experience something new? And we're not going to be lost in that. We don't get shoved into a corner. We will be part of that future, that infinity. So the end message that I hope I can give to other people is that there is hope. There is a beauty beyond this life. In all in our personalities, we just think this is it, and that there can't be anything else. But there is. I mean, I've tried to explain what I saw, and again, people can take from it what they want. But I did one interview with a person who has done lots of interviews of people who have had NDEs. But he did mention that after having read my description, that he felt it was the most intricate and informative description of another dimension that he had encountered. So take that for what it's worth. One of the things that I was very much concerned about was when I started writing about my story, that I needed it to be as accurate as I could remember it. And for a couple of reasons. One, I needed to make sure that I was not being deceived by the whole thing. And I needed to make sure that I was not deceiving myself by what I thought might have happened. And I certainly didn't want to deceive anyone else with a false narrative of what I thought was out there, rather than what I believed I saw in it. I do want to, I didn't really explain a whole lot about the people who actually saved my life at the fitness center and the EMTs. I did go back and interview each one of them to understand fully what had happened in that period of time where I had no recollection of what was going on. I wasn't really present for all their actions. So they were all willing to talk with me. And in the interviews, when I got done with the 12 of them, I was really quite amazed because they each could remember exactly all the actions they took. They weren't aware of what the person next to them was doing as much, but they could remember precisely what they did, which was very helpful to me. So, in looking back on that portion of my experience, I'm grateful for the emergency services. And to anyone listening to this, I would hope they appreciate the EMTs and the ambulance service and the personnel who dedicate themselves to helping other people. None of these people had known me. Well, those in the fitness room did, but none of the EMTs knew who I was. But they worked really hard to bring me back. At one point, I couldn't tell them to stop because I liked where I was, but they kept going, and they were able to pull me back. Now, in the area I live, it's a rural area with small communities, and there are many of those across the country. And most of those, if not all of the rural and small community EMT services are volunteers. So I would hope that people would thank their local volunteer EMTs because they're really worthy of your support. They often fly under the radar until they're needed, and then they really become front and center. So I just want to highlight their contributions to my being here. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to add at the end. But unless you have some more questions.
No, I will back up that I think you did a really wonderful description in your book of Another Dimension. I agree with that. And your book was also a beautiful tribute to EMTs. And it was also, I thought, a beautiful love story between you and your wife. So it had a lot of depth to it and was really I thought it was a beautiful book. So
Thank you. I didn't even get into the aspect of how something like I experienced affects the rest of the family. It did my wife and our children. Well, they're not children; they're adults now. But an event like mine certainly impacts more than just me. It sends out ripples in all directions to your family, your friends. My wife Mary, in an instant, had my whole life dumped onto her lap, whether or not she wanted it. And she ended up really having to first of all, deal with my hospitalization. Had to deal with telling all her friends about what happened. So I had a 6-inch stack of papers of all her emails. The aspect of finances had to be dealt with all the time. When she was wondering if I'd be awake in the morning, I wasn't allowed to go outside by myself for a while because she didn't know where she'd find me. So there was a lot of stress put on a partner, my wife, and I'm sure there are other people who may have experienced something like this, that their partner, spouse, other family members are all impacted by it, and they should, be cognizant of how that does affect everyone besides yourself. I mean, I was humbled by a lot of it because of the people who helped were concerned.
So I'm going to have one last question. Where can our listeners find you, follow you, remind them the name of your book and where they can find it?
Okay. My book is titled 6 Minutes in Eternity, and it's available from Lisa Hagen Books .com is the one who published my book, and it's available on Amazon. I have a Facebook page, Philip Hasheider at facebook.com. I have a Gmail. If someone wants to ask a question, they can address it to philiphasheiderbooks.com. And what was the other thing?
That was it. Just where they can find
Oh,
you, follow you, reach out, any way they can get your book, say, so perfect.
yeah, it is now out on Audible. So it is available as a Audible book. There are a lot of people who prefer to listen versus read, and that's fine.
Yeah.
I'll get the same content. It won't be me narrating it, though.
Oh, a good choice. I'm in the middle of narrating my book. It's very time consuming. So.
Oh, okay. You're doing your own?
Yeah, I'm doing my own audiobook. It's a lot. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I so appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Liz. I appreciate it, and your patience with all the problems we were having with the beginning.
Hey, everyone. I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@WTFJustHappened.net and put science and spirituality in the title. To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey-Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@WTFJustHappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?